Wealthy CEO divorced black ex-wife after $8 million lottery win. 3 years later, he sees her with triplets who look just like him. Are they mine? Damien's voice trembled as he stared at the 3 toddlers clinging to his ex-wife's dress. Yes, Morgana replied, her voice steady as steel. All 3 of them. Conceived during our last month together, before you decided I wasn't worth keeping around. Morgana, I never said, you didn't have to say anything. Your actions spoke clearly enough. The lottery ticket was barely validated before you were meeting with divorce lawyers. I was young and stupid and rich, she finished coldly. Don't forget rich. That was the important part, wasn't it? Finally having enough money to trade up to a better class of woman. Before we dive into this heart-wrenching story of love, loss, and second chances, tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Are you commuting to work? Taking a lunch break? Maybe it's late at night and you can't sleep? And if you're ready for a story that will make you question everything you think you know about true wealth, hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss these powerful life lessons. Trust me, you'll want to stay for every single twist in this incredible journey. Now, let's go back to the beginning and discover how an $8.2 million lottery win became the most expensive mistake of one man's life. The Mediterranean sun painted golden streaks across the infinity pool of the Hotel du Cap Eden Rock, but Damien Ashcroft felt nothing but emptiness as he adjusted his Italian sunglasses and took another sip of Dom Perignon. 3 years of unimaginable wealth had taught him a brutal truth. Money could buy anything except the ability to forget the woman who'd walked away from it all. His phone buzzed with yet another business notification. Tech Fusion Industries was generating another 7 figures while he lounged in luxury, but Damien ignored it. The company practically ran itself now, managed by a team of brilliant executives while he lived like a modern-day king across 3 continents. Mr. Ashcroft? His personal assistant, Miranda, materialized beside his lounge chair like a ghost in Hermes. Everything about her screamed expensive, from her perfectly pressed Chanel suit to her discreet diamond earrings that probably cost more than most people's cars. Your car is ready for the charity gala, sir. Damien nodded without enthusiasm. Another fundraiser. Another opportunity to be photographed with beautiful socialites who laughed at his jokes because of his bank account, not his wit. Another evening of writing checks with amounts that made headlines while feeling absolutely nothing inside. He stood, straightening his custom Tom Ford tuxedo that cost more than he used to make in a month. The fabric was perfection, the fit flawless, but it felt like a costume. Everything in his life felt like an elaborate performance now. As he followed Miranda toward the resort's private entrance, Damien caught sight of a young couple walking hand-in-hand along the pristine beach below. They were laughing at something, stopping to kiss with the easy intimacy of people who belong to each other. The woman threw her head back, and for just a moment, the sound of her laughter carried on the evening breeze. That hollow ache in his chest, the one that had become his constant companion, sharpened into something that felt like physical pain. Morgana. Even now, 3 years later, her name could steal his breath. His ex-wife. The woman he'd divorced the moment his lottery numbers came up, convinced he deserved better than a struggling art teacher who clipped coupons and shopped at thrift stores. The woman who'd signed those divorce papers without a single tear, her sea-green eyes dry as desert stones as she walked out of their cramped apartment for the last time. Sir. Miranda's voice cut through his memories. The driver is waiting. Damien nodded, sliding into the back of his Bentley Mulsanne. As the luxury sedan glided through the French countryside toward the vineyard hosting tonight's charity gala, he found himself doing what he'd sworn he wouldn't do anymore, remembering. 2 years earlier. Damien, look at this. Morgana's voice had been breathless with excitement as she burst through the door of their tiny studio apartment, waving a newspaper clipping. The community center is offering art classes for underprivileged kids, but they need volunteer teachers. I could finally do something that matters. He looked up from his laptop where he'd been working on another freelance web design project, earning just enough to keep them afloat. Morgana stood in their doorway like a burst of sunshine, her auburn hair catching the late afternoon light, her green eyes sparkling with the kind of joy that money couldn't buy. She was wearing that yellow sundress he loved, the one she'd found at a consignment shop for $12 and somehow made look like it belonged on a runway. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement, and she was practically bouncing on her toes. That's amazing, sweetheart, he'd said, saving his work and closing the laptop. Tell me everything. She launched into the details, curling up beside him on their second-hand couch that they'd covered with a colorful throw to hide the worn spots. Her enthusiasm was infectious as she described her vision for the program, how she wanted to show these kids that art could be an escape, a form of expression, a way to see beauty in a world that often showed them only hardship. The pay is terrible, she'd admitted with a laugh. Like, really terrible. But Damien, imagine if we could change just one kid's life. Imagine if we could show them that creating something beautiful is possible even when everything around them feels broken. That was Morgana. Always seeing the potential for beauty, always believing in the power of hope. Even when their own bank account rarely had more than a few $100s, even when they ate ramen noodles 3 nights a week, she never lost that light in her eyes. Then you should do it, he'd said, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. We'll make it work. We always do. They'd made love that afternoon on their lumpy mattress, with the late sun streaming through their thin curtains and the sounds of the city below filtering through their open windows. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking about their dreams. Someday, Morgana had whispered, tracing patterns on his chest with her fingertip, we'll have a real studio. Big windows facing north for the perfect light. Easels and canvases everywhere. Maybe even a garden where I can paint outdoors. Someday, he'd agreed. I'll build you that studio. Glass walls, if you want them. And a separate space for those kids you're going to teach. Your own little academy. She'd lifted her head to look at him, her eyes soft with love. You really believe that'll happen? I believe we can do anything together, he'd said, and meant it with every cell in his body. 3 months later, they'd pooled their spare change, literally counting quarters and dimes, to buy a lottery ticket for their second wedding anniversary. It was supposed to be a joke, a silly romantic gesture. $5 that could have bought them coffee, spent instead on an impossible dream. If we win, Morgana had said, laughing as she filled in the numbers, what's the first thing you'll buy? A ring that actually fits you properly, Damien had replied immediately. The thin gold band on her finger had been all they could afford when they got married, and it was slightly too small, leaving a mark on her finger that she never complained about. And I'll buy you a proper desk, she'd said. One that doesn't wobble when you type. They'd kissed over that lottery ticket, sealing their impossible wishes with love and laughter. When those numbers came up 6 days later, everything changed. Damien. Morgana's voice had been strange, hollow, as she stared at her laptop screen. Damien, come look at this. He'd been in their tiny kitchen, making their usual dinner of pasta and whatever vegetables were on sale that week. Something in her tone made him drop the wooden spoon and rush to her side. The lottery website was open on her screen. Their numbers, the ones they'd chosen together, laughing about how they'd picked their anniversary date and the day they first met, stared back at them in digital black and white. Is that? His voice had failed him. $8.2 million, Morgana whispered. Damien, we won. We actually won. The next few minutes were a blur of disbelief, of checking and double-checking, of calling the lottery office to confirm what seemed impossible. When they finally hung up the phone, they stood in their small living room, staring at each other like strangers. $8.2 million, Damien repeated, as if saying it would make it real. We can have that studio now, Morgana said softly. And the academy for the kids. And you can start your own company instead of working for other people. They should have been celebrating. Should have been dancing around their tiny apartment, making plans, calling their families. Instead, something had shifted between them in those first moments of realization, something subtle but seismic. For the first time in their marriage, Damien found himself really looking at their apartment, really seeing the water stain on the ceiling, the scratched hardwood floors, the secondhand furniture they'd been so proud of when they couldn't afford better. Suddenly, it all looked shabby, small, beneath them. We should call my parents, he'd said. Morgana had nodded, but her smile seemed forced. They'll be so excited for us. But when Damien called his family, successful lawyers and business people who'd never quite hidden their disappointment in his bohemian phase, their reaction wasn't excitement. It was relief. Finally, his mother had said, her voice crisp with satisfaction. Now you can start living appropriately. Get a proper home, join the right clubs, meet the right people. This changes everything, Damien. The right people. The phrase echoed in his head long after he hung up the phone. He looked at Morgana, who was curled up on their couch reading a book about teaching art to children, her hair falling in soft waves over her shoulder, and for the first time, he wondered if she was the right person for this new life he was suddenly able to afford. That night, they'd made love with a desperate hunger that surprised them both. Morgana clung to him like she was afraid he might disappear, and Damien lost himself in her warmth, her softness, the way she whispered his name like a prayer. But even in the midst of passion, something had changed. Where there had once been complete trust, now there was a question mark hanging in the air between them. "I love you," she'd whispered afterward, her head on his chest, her breathing slowly returning to normal. "I love you too," he'd replied automatically, but even as he said it, his mind was already racing ahead to the possibilities their new wealth would open. The doors that would suddenly swing wide, the opportunities that would present themselves, the life he could build if he was smart about it. He'd fallen asleep that night with Morgana in his arms, but his dreams were filled with penthouses and board meetings, luxury cars and first-class flights, a world so far removed from their current reality that it might as well have been another planet. When he woke up the next morning, the woman beside him, with her makeup-free face and her second-hand nightgown, looked like a relic from a life he was already outgrowing. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, insidious, like a slow poison working its way through his system. First came the financial advisors, the investment consultants, the lawyers who specialized in sudden wealth syndrome. They all said the same thing. He needed to think bigger, act smarter, position himself for the kind of success that could turn 8 million into 80 million. Location is everything, his new financial advisor, Richard Blackstone, had said during their first meeting. Richard was everything Damien had once mocked, perfectly groomed, expensively dressed, speaking in crisp sentences about market positioning and wealth optimization. Now suddenly, he seemed like exactly the kind of person Damien should be listening to. "You can't build a tech empire from a studio apartment," Richard continued, his smile sharp as a blade. "Image matters. Credibility matters. The right address opens doors that talent alone never could." Damien had nodded, taking notes like a student. "What do you recommend?" "Start with real estate. A penthouse in Manhattan, something that makes a statement. Then work on your network. The charity circuit, exclusive clubs, the kind of events where deals are made over handshakes and scotch." "And my wife?" Damien had asked, almost as an afterthought. Richard's pause was telling. "Well, she'll need some adjustments too. Image coaching, wardrobe consulting. The right stylist can work wonders. And perhaps some social training. The wise in these circles have their own rules, their own expectations." Driving home that day in the BMW he'd just leased, Damien found himself really looking at their neighborhood for the first time. The cracked sidewalks, the corner store with its hand-painted signs, the children playing in the small park with its rusted playground equipment. A month ago, this had felt like home. Now it felt like a limitation. Morgana was in their kitchen when he arrived, still in her paint-splattered clothes from the community center, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was stirring something on their ancient stove, humming under her breath, completely absorbed in the simple act of making dinner. "How was your meeting?" she asked without turning around. "Productive," he'd said, watching her move around their tiny kitchen with unconscious grace. "Richard thinks we should move." She turned then, wooden spoon in hand, eyebrows raised. "Move? Why?" "Better neighborhood. Better opportunities. A place that reflects our new situation." Something had flickered across her face, hurt, maybe, or confusion. "I like our neighborhood. I like our neighbors. Mrs. Chin brings me vegetables from her garden, and the kids at the center are just starting to trust me. Morgana, we can afford better now. We should live better." "Better?" Her voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. "What's wrong with the life we have?" That was the question that started their first real fight. Not a disagreement or a tiff, but an actual fight with raised voices and hurt feelings and words that couldn't be taken back. "Nothing's wrong with it," Damien had said, but his tone suggested otherwise. "It's just small, limited. We have options now that we didn't have before." "Options to what? Abandon everything we've built together? Abandon the people who matter to us?" "I'm not talking about abandoning anything. I'm talking about growth, about seizing opportunities." Morgana had set down the spoon and faced him fully. "Whose opportunities, Damien?" "Because the opportunities one care about are right here. The kids I'm teaching, the community center that needs funding, the life we've been building together. But we could do so much more." "More what? More money? More things? Since when do you care about things?" Since Richard Blackstone showed him a different way to live. Since he'd started imagining himself in boardrooms instead of coffee shops, making deals instead of scraping by. Since he'd begun to see their love story as quaint rather than beautiful. But he couldn't say any of that to Morgana. Not when she was looking at him like he'd become a stranger. Their argument had ended in bed, as many of their fights did, but the sex felt different now. Where there had once been playful passion, now there was something desperate, as if they were both trying to recapture something that was already slipping away. "I don't want to lose us," Morgana had whispered afterward, her head on his chest, her fingers tracing circles on his skin. "You won't," he'd promised, but even as he said it, he was thinking about the penthouse listings Richard had shown him, the exclusive events he could attend, the connections he could make. He was already gone, even if his body was still there in their bed. The end came 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other and ended with the destruction of everything they'd built together. Morgana had been sick for weeks, tired, nauseous, unable to keep food down. She'd attributed it to stress, to the changes happening so rapidly in their lives, to the constant arguments that had become their new normal. But that Tuesday morning, as Damien prepared to leave for another meeting with his advisors, she looked up from her untouched breakfast with something like wonder in her eyes. "Damien," she'd said softly, "I need to tell you something." But he'd been checking his watch, his mind already on the lunch meeting where he was supposed to discuss investment opportunities in emerging markets. His new life was full of such meetings, such opportunities, such important conversations about money and growth and positioning. "Can it wait until tonight?" he'd asked without really looking at her. "This meeting with the Singapore investors is crucial. I'm pregnant." The words stopped him cold. He turned to stare at her, his briefcase half open in his hand, his mind struggling to process what she'd just said. "What?" "I'm pregnant, Damien. About 6 weeks along." She was glowing. That was his first coherent thought, that despite the morning sickness and exhaustion, she was absolutely radiant. Her hand rested protectively over her still flat stomach, and her smile was the same one she'd worn when she told him about the art program for kids. It should have been the best news in the world. They talked about children, dreamed about them, imagined the family they'd build together. But all Damien could think about was what Richard Blackstone had said about image, about positioning, about the kind of life successful people led. "Are you sure?" he'd asked. "I took 3 tests. Then I went to the doctor yesterday to confirm." Her smile faltered slightly at his reaction. "I wanted to be certain before I told you." "Yesterday? You've known since yesterday. I wanted it to be special when I told you. I was going to make dinner. Maybe get a bottle of that sparkling cider we like. You should have told me immediately." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, and he watched Morgana's face change. The joy dimmed, replaced by confusion and hurt. I thought you'd be happy." "I am happy," he'd said automatically, but they both knew it was a lie. "It's just, the timing is complicated." Complicated how? How could he explain that a pregnant wife didn't fit the image he was building? That the investors and clients he was courting expected a certain type of sophistication, a certain freedom to travel and entertain and be available at a moment's notice? How could he tell the woman he'd loved that she was becoming an inconvenience? This investment opportunity requires a lot of travel. International deals, meetings in different time zones. And with the baby coming. Morgana had stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "Are you saying you don't want this baby?" "I'm saying the timing isn't ideal." "When would be ideal, Damien?" "When you've made enough money. When you've impressed enough people. When you become someone so different that I don't recognize you anymore." The fight that followed was brutal in its honesty. 3 months of accumulated resentments and unspoken fears erupted in a torrent of accusations and truths that cut deep. "You've changed," Morgana had said, tears streaming down her face. "Ever since we won that money, you've become someone else. Someone who's embarrassed by our life, by our friends, by me." "That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time we had dinner with Sarah and Mike? When's the last time you came to the community center to see the kids' artwork? When's the last time you looked at me like you loved me instead of like I was holding you back?" He'd wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in his throat because she was right. Somewhere along the way, love had become a liability, and the woman who'd shared his dreams had become an obstacle to his ambitions. "Maybe," he'd said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth, "we should take a break. Give each other some space to figure out what we want." The silence that followed was deafening. Morgana had stopped crying, stopped moving, stopped breathing for what felt like an eternity. When she finally spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. "What I want is my husband back. The man who used to believe that we could conquer the world together. The man who thought our love was worth more than any amount of money." She'd wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But I don't think that man exists anymore." 3 days later, the divorce papers arrived by courier. Damien had signed them without reading them thoroughly, telling himself he was being merciful, that this was better for both of them. Morgana could find someone who wanted the small, simple life she craved, and he could build the empire he was meant to create. He transferred $1 million to her account, what he considered generous alimony, and told himself it was enough. More than enough. He never asked about the baby again. What happens next will shock you. But first, let me know in the comments. Do you think Damien's transformation was inevitable, or could he have chosen differently? And hit that like button if you're ready to see whether money really can buy back the love of a lifetime. Present day, French Vineyard Charity Gala. The Children's Hospital Gala was held at Chateau Margaux, one of France's most exclusive vineyards. Damien arrived fashionably late, as always, stepping out of his Bugatti Chiron to a flurry of camera flashes. The who's who of European society mingled on the terraced gardens, their jewelry catching the warm evening light as waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated with crystal flutes of vintage Dom Perignon. He worked the crowd with practiced charm, writing checks with amounts that made tomorrow's headlines. $250,000 for the Children's Cancer Wing. $500,000 for the new pediatric research facility. Numbers that meant nothing to him but everything to the cause. Damien Ashcroft, such a pleasure. Air kisses from socialites whose names he couldn't remember. Handshakes from business associates who wanted his investment in their latest ventures. The usual performance of wealth and influence that had become his life. But tonight felt different. Tonight, that familiar emptiness in his chest seemed to echo louder than usual as he watched couples move together with easy intimacy, as he observed families with their children, as he pretended to laugh at jokes that weren't funny and smile at people who only saw his bank account. "The Ashcroft Foundation's generosity continues to astound us," said Dr. Elizabeth Moreau, the hospital's chief administrator, as she approached with a warm smile. "Your contributions have already saved hundreds of children's lives." "It's the least I can do," Damien replied automatically, the words feeling hollow in his mouth. "Speaking of children," Dr. Moreau continued, "you simply must meet one of our most inspiring supporters. She's a young mother who's overcome incredible odds to build a successful career while raising triplets on her own. A true testament to the human spirit." She gestured toward the silent auction tables, where a small crowd had gathered around several stunning abstract paintings. "Her artwork is being auctioned tonight. The piece called Phoenix Rising has already reached 6 figures. Damien followed her gaze politely, expecting to see another charity case to write a check for. Instead, his world tilted on its axis. There she was. Morgana stood near the auction display, but she wasn't alone. 3 identical toddlers clung to her flowing emerald dress, 2 boys and 1 girl, perhaps 18 months old, with unmistakable features that made his champagne flute slip from suddenly nerveless fingers. The crystal shattered against the marble terrace in a spray of golden liquid and glittering shards, but Damien barely heard it. His eyes were locked on those 3 small faces, faces that looked exactly like his own baby pictures, complete with the distinctive Ashcroft cleft chin and thick dark lashes. His children. The baby Morgana had been carrying when he'd walked away had become 3 children he'd never known existed. She looked up as if sensing his stare, and their gazes locked across the crowded terrace. 3 years had only enhanced her beauty. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, her figure fuller and more womanly than he remembered. But it was her eyes that destroyed him. Those same sea-green depths that had once looked at him with such love now held only carefully controlled indifference. One of the little boys tugged at her dress, babbling something in a toddler's excited gibberish. She smiled down at him, a radiant expression that had once been reserved for Damien alone, and scooped the child into her arms. "Mama, want juice," the little girl declared, reaching up with chubby arms that looked exactly like Damien's childhood photos. "In a moment, sweetheart," Morgana murmured, her voice carrying across the space between them like a ghost of memory. Damien moved toward them as if pulled by invisible strings, his legs unsteady beneath him. Conversations faded around him as other guests noticed his obvious distress, but he heard nothing except the thundering of his own heart. Morgana. She turned at the sound of her name, shifting the toddler in her arms. Up close, he could see the faint lines around her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights and solo parenting that carved guilt into his soul like a blade. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, but there was a strength in her bearing now, a confidence that spoke of battles fought and won without him. Damien. Her voice was steady, controlled. I didn't expect to see you here. I could say the same. His gaze moved helplessly to the three children. The resemblance was undeniable. They were miniature versions of himself at that age, but with Morgana's delicate features softening his sharper ones. The third child, a boy with Damien's exact eye color, stared up at him with curious intensity. Mama, who man? Morgana's composure flickered for just a moment. This is an old friend of Mama's. An old friend. The words hit him like physical blows. He'd been her husband, her lover, the man who'd promised to spend forever worshipping her body and soul. Now he was reduced to an old friend in front of the children he'd never known existed. How old are they? He asked quietly, though he already knew the answer would destroy him. 18 months. She met his gaze steadily. Born exactly 9 months after our divorce was finalized. The math was simple, devastating. She'd been pregnant with triplets when he'd served her with papers. Pregnant with 3 of his children while he'd been celebrating his lottery win and planning his new life of luxury and freedom. Morgana, I'm Mama, hungry. The little girl in her arms interrupted, tugging at Morgana's necklace, a simple silver chain that Damien recognized as the one he'd given her for their first anniversary, back when his biggest gift could only cost $50. Of course, baby. Morgana's attention shifted completely to her children, dismissing him as effectively as if he'd never existed. Let's find some of those little sandwiches you like. She moved away without another word, the triplets chattering around her like small birds. Damien watched them go, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like a costume, his billions meaningless as dust. He stood frozen in the middle of the elegant gathering, guests flowing around him like water around a stone, until a familiar voice cut through his paralysis. Damien? My God, is that really you? He turned to find Helena Winters, an old family friend and prominent art dealer, approaching with what looked like genuine warmth. She'd aged gracefully, her silver hair elegant in an upswept style, her kind eyes crinkling with pleasure, until she saw his expression. Helena. He managed a weak smile. Good to see you. And you, darling. Though you look like you've seen a ghost. Her gaze followed his earlier line of sight toward Morgana and the children. Ah, that would explain it. You know her. Helena's expression grew carefully neutral, protective. Morgana Thorne is one of our most successful artists now. Her work sells for 6 figures, abstract pieces that capture raw emotion in the most extraordinary way. She's quite remarkable. Thorne. She'd taken back her maiden name, erasing all trace of their marriage from her identity. The children are beautiful, Helena interrupted firmly, and well-loved. Morgana has built a wonderful life for herself and her family. The emphasis on family wasn't lost on him. Helena knew exactly who those children belonged to, and her protective tone made her opinion of his abandonment crystal clear. I didn't know, he said quietly. About the pregnancy. About 3. Helena's laugh held no humor. Didn't you? Or did you simply choose not to know? There's a difference, Damien. The accusation hit home because it contained truth. When Morgana had tried to talk to him in those final weeks of their marriage, he'd been too intoxicated by his sudden wealth to listen. Too busy planning his escape from their modest life to notice her pale mornings, her exhausted afternoons, the way her hands sometimes drifted unconsciously to her stomach. She tried to tell you, you know, Helena continued, her voice gentle but unforgiving. Called you several times after the divorce was finalized. You had your assistant screen your calls. The memory hit him like a physical blow. He'd instructed Miranda to handle any calls from Morgana, to deal with whatever complications might arise from their separation. He'd been too busy building his empire to be bothered with the past. I need to speak with her, he said desperately. I wouldn't recommend it. Not here, not like this. Helena's voice softened slightly. She's worked very hard to build a stable life for those children. Don't disrupt that unless you're prepared to be the man they need, not just the man you want to be. What do you mean? Helena studied him with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd seen too much of human nature. I mean, Damien, that wanting something and being worthy of it are 2 very different things. Those children have a mother who's never let them down. If you want to be part of their lives, you'll need to prove you won't let them down either. Before Damien could respond, Helena melted back into the crowd, leaving him alone with his churning thoughts. He spent the rest of the evening watching Morgana from a distance, memorizing every detail of her interactions with their children. She was a magnificent mother, patient when they grew fussy, creative in keeping them entertained, fiercely protective when other guests tried to engage them with too much enthusiasm. The triplets adored her with the uncomplicated devotion only children could give, reaching for her constantly, seeking comfort in her arms. One of the boys, the one who'd stared at him with such curious intensity, seemed to be the leader of the trio. He helped his sister when she struggled with her small plate of food, and kept a watchful eye on his more adventurous brother who kept trying to wander toward the fountain. The girl was quieter, more observant, content to stay close to Morgana's side and watch the world with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She had Morgana's thoughtful expression and what looked like her artistic soul. Damien watched her trace patterns in the air with her finger, as if painting invisible masterpieces. The third boy was pure joy in motion, constantly smiling, constantly finding wonder in everything around him. He reminded Damien painfully of himself at that age, full of energy and curiosity and an unshakable belief that the world was full of endless possibilities. His children. The thought kept circling through his mind like a prayer or a curse. These three perfect little humans were half his, carried his DNA, might have inherited his stubbornness or his ambition or his talent for seeing patterns where others saw chaos. And he'd missed everything. Their births, their first smiles, their first words, their first steps. 18 months of milestones and moments that could never be recovered or replaced. Near the end of the evening, as families began departing with sleepy children, Damien found his opportunity. Morgana was loading the triplets into a modest Peugeot sedan, such a stark contrast to his fleet of luxury vehicles that shame burned his throat like acid. The car was practical, reliable, chosen for safety rather than status. Car seats filled the back seat, and he could see evidence of family life scattered throughout, coloring books, small toys, juice boxes, the detritus of a life lived with children at its center. Morgana, wait. She looked up from buckling the little girl into her car seat, weariness flickering across her features. What do you want, Damien? To talk. Please. Just for a few minutes. About what? Your sudden interest in charity work? Your impressive portfolio? Her voice was carefully neutral, but he could hear the steel underneath. There's nothing left to say between us. There are 3 things, he said quietly, nodding toward the car where the boys were already dozing in their seats. 3 very important things. Her hands stilled on the car seat straps. For a long moment, she didn't speak, and Damien held his breath, waiting for her response. Tomorrow, she said finally. Café Laurent on Rue Montmartre. 2 o'clock. The children will be napping. She slid into the driver's seat without another word, and Damien watched her taillights disappear into the Parisian night, already counting the hours until he could see her again. Damien didn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse suite at the George V, the lights of Paris twinkling below him like fallen stars, and tried to process the magnitude of what he'd discovered. 3 children. His children. Living and breathing and growing up without him, just a few miles away from his luxurious hotel room. He found himself on his laptop, searching for information about Morgana's new life. Helena had been right about her artistic success. Her paintings commanded impressive prices, and critics praised her raw emotional honesty. Looking at images of her work online, Damien could see his own abandonment reflected in violent slashes of paint, in colors that bled together like tears. One piece, titled "The Space You Left Behind," showed a woman sitting at a kitchen table, her hand resting on her pregnant belly, staring at an empty chair across from her. The loneliness in the painting was so palpable it made his chest ache. Another, called Trinity, depicted 3 small figures dancing in a circle of light, while a shadow washed from the darkness at the edge of the frame. The love radiating from the dancing figures was beautiful and heartbreaking, and the isolation of the shadow figure was devastating in its accuracy. She'd transformed her pain into art, built a career from the ashes of their marriage while raising 3 children alone. The reviews spoke of her unflinching honesty and profound emotional depth. One critic wrote, "Thorne's work captures the complexities of motherhood, loss, and resilience with a raw beauty that leaves viewers forever changed." He found articles about her charitable work too. She taught free art classes at community centers across Paris, donated pieces to children's hospitals, supported programs for single mothers. She'd become everything she dreamed of being, everything they'd talked about in their tiny apartment when they thought love was enough to conquer the world. And she'd done it all without him. Around 3 in the morning, exhaustion finally claimed him, but his dreams were filled with images of 3 small faces and the sound of a woman's voice saying, "This is an old friend of Mama's." When he woke at dawn, his pillows were damp with tears he didn't remember shedding. Café Laurent was a small, intimate bistro tucked into a quiet corner of Montmartre, far from the tourist crowds and society photographers. Damien arrived early, claiming a corner table where they could speak privately. He'd spent the morning getting ready like he was preparing for the most important business meeting of his life, which, in many ways, he was. But this wasn't about money or deals or market positioning. This was about the 3 most important people in the world, people he'd never met but already loved with a fierce desperation that surprised him. She arrived precisely on time, wearing simple jeans and a cream sweater that somehow made her look more elegant than all the designer gowns at last night's gala. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she carried herself with the confident grace of a woman who'd survived the worst and emerged stronger. "You look beautiful," he said as she slid into the seat across from him. "Don't." The single word carried years of steel. "We're not here for compliments or small talk. You wanted to discuss the children, so discuss them." Her directness was like a slap, but he deserved it. The Morgana he'd married had been softer, more trusting. This woman had learned to protect herself, and he was the one who'd taught her that lesson. "Are they mine?" The question felt stupid even as he asked it. The resemblance was undeniable, but he needed to hear her confirm it. "Yes." She met his gaze without flinching. "All 3 of them. Conceived during our last month together, before you decided I wasn't worth keeping around." "Morgana, I never said." "You didn't have to say anything. Your actions spoke clearly enough." She accepted a cup of coffee from the hovering waitress, wrapping her fingers around the ceramic for warmth. "The lottery ticket was barely validated before you were meeting with divorce lawyers. I was young and stupid and rich," she finished coldly. "Don't forget rich. That was the important part, wasn't it? Finally having enough money to trade up to a better class of woman." The bitterness in her voice cut deeper than any knife. Damien reached across the table, but she pulled her hands away before he could touch her. "It wasn't like that, wasn't it?" She leaned back in her chair, studying him with those penetrating green eyes. "Because I remember quite clearly how you suddenly found fault with everything about our life together. Our apartment was too small, my job was too embarrassing, my friends were too ordinary. I wasn't glamorous enough for your new image." Each word was a precise wound, reopening guilt he tried to bury under years of luxury and distraction. Because she was right, he had been embarrassed by their modest life once money made upgrades possible. He convinced himself he was doing them both a favor by ending things cleanly. "I was an idiot," he admitted quietly. "The worst kind of fool. But Morgana, I swear I didn't know about the pregnancy. Not the full truth. Would it have mattered?" The challenge in her voice stared him to lie. He wanted to say yes immediately, but honesty, the brutal kind, made him pause. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "The man I was then. I might have seen it as another obligation, another tied to a life I was desperate to escape." Something shifted in her expression, not forgiveness, but perhaps a grudging respect for his candor. "At least you're honest about being selfish." "I'm trying to be honest about everything now." He leaned forward, desperate to make her understand. "Morgana, these past 3 years, I thought I was living, but I was just existing. All the money, the houses, the recognition, none of it means anything without someone real to share it with. And you think that someone is me?" Her laugh held no warmth. "After I've spent 3 years raising your children alone, building a life from nothing, becoming strong enough to survive without you, now you want back in?" Comment below. Do you think Damien deserves a second chance, or has he lost that right forever? And hit that like button if you believe people can truly change. I know I have no right. You don't. She stood abruptly, clearly done with the conversation. "You signed away any rights you had when you chose money over family. Please." The word came out broken, desperate. "Just tell me their names." She paused in the act of reaching for her purse, something flickering across her face, a mother's pride breaking through her armor. "Aurelius, Celeste, and Maximilian. Ori, Cece, and Max." The names hit him like physical blows, strong, beautiful names for the children he'd never held, never comforted during nightmares, never seen take their first steps. Aurelius was born first, she continued, her voice softening despite herself. 2 minutes ahead of his siblings and already trying to take care of them. Celeste came next, quiet, observant, already showing signs of artistic talent. And Max. Her smile was involuntary, radiant. Max came into the world laughing, and he hasn't stopped since. Morgana, he whispered as she prepared to leave. I love you. I never stopped loving you. She turned back to him, and for just a moment, he saw a flash of the woman he'd married, vulnerable, hopeful, achingly beautiful. Then her walls slammed back into place. Love isn't enough, Damien. It never was. You taught me that. Damien sat alone in the cafe long after Morgana had left, her words echoing in his mind like a death sentence. Love isn't enough. It never was. You taught me that. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He had taught her that. Through his actions, his choices, his willingness to abandon everything they'd built together the moment something shinier came along. But sitting there surrounded by the lingering scent of her perfume and the ghost of her presence, Damien felt something shift inside him. For 3 years, he'd been sleepwalking through a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt empty as a tomb. Now, faced with the reality of what he'd lost, not just Morgana, but 3 children who shared his DNA but not his love, he finally understood what true poverty looked like. He pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant. Miranda, I need you to cancel everything. All meetings, all appointments, all social obligations for the next month. Sir. Her voice was sharp with concern. The Singapore deal closes next week. In the charity board meeting, cancel it all. And Miranda? I want you to research the best family therapists in Paris. The kind who work with complicated situations. There was a pause. Are you feeling all right, Mr. Ashcroft? No, he said quietly. But I'm going to be. Dr. Sophie Beaumont's office was nothing like the sterile corporate environments Damien was used to. Warm lighting, comfortable chairs, children's artwork on the walls, it felt like stepping into a completely different world. Tell me why you're here, Damien, Dr. Beaumont said gently. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd heard every possible human story. I just discovered I have 3 children I never knew existed, he began, the words feeling surreal even as he spoke them. My ex-wife was pregnant when I divorced her, and I was too selfish and blind to notice. That must have been quite a shock. I thought I'd lost everything when she left. I had no idea I'd actually thrown everything away. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. I want to be a father to them, but I don't know how. I don't even know where to start. Dr. Beaumont nodded thoughtfully. What do you know about being a parent? Nothing, he admitted. My own parents were distant. Successful, but distant. I was raised by nannies and boarding schools. I know how to close business deals, but I don't know how to read bedtime stories. Parenting isn't about what you know, she said gently. It's about who you're willing to become. The question is, are you ready to put 3 small people's needs before your own? Every single day, for the rest of your life. The question hung in the air between them. 6 months ago, Damien would have said yes without thinking, confident in his ability to handle any challenge. Now, he understood the weight of what she was asking. I want to be, he said finally, but I need to learn how. Over the following weeks, Dr. Beaumont became his guide into a world he'd never imagined. She taught him about child development, about the particular challenges of single-parent families, about the trauma that divorce could inflict on children even when they were too young to understand it. Your children have never known a father figure, she explained during one session. They've built their security around their mother. You can't just walk into their lives and expect instant acceptance. Trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. She assigned him homework. Research about 18-month-old development, books about healthy attachment, articles about blended families. For the first time since his MBA, Damien found himself studying not for profit, but for love. He learned that Aurelius, as the oldest by those crucial 2 minutes, had likely developed strong protective instincts toward his siblings. That Celeste's quiet observation was typical of artistic children who processed the world differently. That Maximilian's constant joy was both a gift and a potential mask for deeper emotions. But knowing facts and understanding hearts were 2 different things entirely. Damien's first mistake was thinking he could learn about his children from a distance. He hired private investigators, discreetly, he thought, to provide him with information about their daily routines, their preferences, their personalities. The reports came back filled with details that broke his heart. Aurelius always checked to make sure his siblings were safe before he would go to sleep. Celeste had started drawing pictures of families with missing figures. Maximilian asked their mother every morning if today was the day the man would come back. They remembered him. Even at 18 months, they remembered the stranger who'd appeared at the gala and made their mother sad. Armed with this knowledge, Damien began his campaign. Anonymous gifts appeared at their doorstep: art supplies for Celeste, building blocks for Aurelius, musical toys for Maximilian. He donated anonymously to their daycare center, ensuring they had the best equipment and teachers. He even arranged for their favorite playground to be renovated, complete with new safety features and equipment designed for toddlers. He thought he was being helpful. He thought he was showing love from a distance. He was wrong. The confrontation came 3 weeks later, when Morgana arrived at his hotel with fire in her eyes and a manila envelope clutched in her hands. "How dare you?" she said the moment he opened his suite door. "Morgana, how dare you have us watched like criminals? How dare you intrude on our privacy, on our lives, without permission?" She thrust the envelope at him. "I hired my own investigator, Damien. I know about the surveillance, the gifts, the puppet strings you're trying to pull from your ivory tower." Inside the envelope were photographs of his hired investigators, reports detailing his activities, proof of every boundary he'd crossed in his misguided attempt to show he cared. "I was trying to help, you were trying to control. Just like before. You think money can fix everything, buy you access to anything, even children you abandoned." Her voice was shaking with rage. "These are my children, Damien. Our children. They're not a business acquisition you can research and strategize your way into owning. That's not what I was doing. Then what were you doing? Because from where I stand, it looks like the same man who walked away 3 years ago is now trying to walk back in on his own terms, in his own way, without any consideration for what we actually need." The words hit him like a physical blow because they contained truth he didn't want to acknowledge. Even in trying to be a father, he'd approached it like a CEO, gathering intelligence, forming strategies, maintaining control. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted finally, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to be a father, how to be part of a family. The only way I know how to solve problems is with money and planning and love," Morgana interrupted, her anger softening slightly at his obvious distress. "The way you solve family problems is with love. Not money, not gifts, not surveillance reports. Love. Then teach me," he said desperately. "Please. I know I have no right to ask, but teach me how to love them properly." For a long moment, she studied his face, searching for something, sincerity, perhaps, or genuine change. What she found there must have satisfied her, because her posture softened slightly. "One chance," she said finally. "One supervised visit. If you can sit in my living room for 2 hours without trying to impress them, without bringing gifts, without being anyone other than yourself, maybe we can talk about more." "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "Convince them you're worth knowing. But more importantly, convince me you're worth trusting." Morgana's apartment was nothing like the modest studio they'd shared years ago, but it wasn't grand either. It was warm, lived in, filled with the beautiful chaos of life with 3 toddlers. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator, toys were scattered across the living room floor, and the whole space smelled like crayons and apple juice and home. The triplets were napping when Damien arrived, giving him a chance to really look at the life Morgana had built without him. Family photos lined the mantel, birthdays, holidays, everyday moments of pure joy. In every single picture, the children looked happy, secure, loved. "They wake up in about an hour," Morgana said, gesturing for him to sit on the comfortable but well-worn couch. "When they do, don't try too hard. Children can sense when adults are performing for them. What should I do then? Just be present. Sit on the floor. Let them approach you if they want to. Don't take it personally if they don't." When the children emerged from their nap rooms, 3 small figures rubbing sleepy eyes and looking for their mother, Damien's heart clenched with a love so fierce it took his breath away. Aurelius spotted him first, his protective instincts immediately kicking in as he stepped slightly in front of his siblings. "Mama, man here?" "Yes, sweetheart. This is Damien. He's going to visit with us for a little while." Celeste peered around her brother's shoulder, her artistic soul apparently fascinated by this new element in their familiar space. "Maximilian, true to his joyful nature, grinned widely and waved. "Hi, man." "Hi," Damien replied softly, staying seated as instructed. "It's nice to see you again." For the next hour, he simply existed in their space. He watched Aurelius build elaborate towers with blocks, his little face serious with concentration. He observed Celeste's quiet commentary on everything around her, the way she saw patterns and colors that others missed. He marveled at Maximilian's ability to find joy in the simplest things. A dust mote dancing in sunlight was apparently the funniest thing he'd ever seen. Slowly, cautiously, they began to include him in their world. Aurelius showed him the right way to stack blocks. Celeste brought him a picture book and pointed out all the animals. Maximilian offered him a bite of his cookie, a gesture so innocent and generous that Damien had to blink back tears. "You can read to them if you want," Morgana said softly from the kitchen, where she'd been preparing their afternoon snack. Reading to children was definitely not in Damien's skill set, but he found himself on the floor with 3 small bodies pressed against him as he stumbled through a story about a little bunny who couldn't sleep. His voice was uncertain at first, but something about their rapt attention gave him confidence. When Maximilian fell asleep against his shoulder halfway through the second book, Damien thought his heart might explode from the pure, overwhelming love of it. "Good," Morgana murmured as she carefully lifted Max and carried him to his room. "That's exactly what they needed. Have you ever had a moment that changed everything you thought you knew about yourself? Drop a comment and let us know, and hit that like button if you believe in the power of small beginnings." The visits became weekly, then twice weekly. Damien learned the rhythm of their days, the particular ways each child needed to be comforted, the small rituals that made them feel safe and loved. Aurelius, he discovered, was indeed the protector of the family. At barely 18 months, he already showed signs of the leadership that ran in the Ashcroft bloodline. But unlike Damien's corporate dominance, Ori's leadership came from love. He shared his toys without being asked, comforted his siblings when they cried, and always made sure everyone was included in whatever game they were playing. "He's going to be special," Damien told Morgana one afternoon as they watched Ori patiently teach Celeste how to stack rings on a peg. "They all are," she replied, but there was warmth in her voice that hadn't been there in weeks past. Celeste was the observer, the artist, the one who saw beauty in everything. She collected interesting leaves from their walks, arranged her food in patterns before eating it, and had an uncanny ability to sense when adults were sad or upset. She was the first to warm to Damien, perhaps recognizing a kindred spirit in someone who appreciated the visual world. "Pretty," she said one day, pointing at a painting on the wall, one of Morgana's pieces that showed a sunset over water. "Yes, it's very pretty," Damien agreed. "Your mama is very talented." "Mama make beautiful," Celeste nodded solemnly, then studied Damien with those 2 wise eyes. "You make beautiful?" It was such a simple question, but it cut to the heart of everything. What did he create? What beauty had he brought into the world? For years, his answer would have been wealth, success, business empires. Now, looking at this perfect little person who shared his genes, but not his cynicism, he wasn't sure he'd ever made anything truly beautiful at all. "I'm learning," he told her honestly. Maximilian was pure joy incarnate. He laughed at everything, found wonder in the mundane, and had an infectious enthusiasm that could lift anyone's spirits. He was also the most physically affectionate of the 3, freely giving hugs and kisses to anyone who showed him kindness. "Daddy," he said one afternoon, completely without preamble, as Damien was helping him put together a puzzle. The word hit Damien like lightning. He looked up to find Morgana watching from the kitchen doorway, her expression unreadable. "What did you say, buddy?" Damien asked gently. "Daddy," Max repeated confidently, then went back to his puzzle as if he hadn't just changed the entire world with one word. Later, after the children were down for their naps, Damien found Morgana on her small balcony, staring out at the Paris skyline. "He called me Daddy," he said softly. "I heard. What does that mean?" Morgana was quiet for a long moment. "It means he's decided to trust you." Children don't use that word lightly, Damien. For him, it's not about biology, it's about safety, about knowing someone will be there when he needs them. "And you? What do you think about him calling me that?" She turned to look at him, and he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not love, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it. "I think you're trying," she said finally. "I think you're genuinely trying to be the man they need you to be. That's more than I expected. But trying isn't the same as succeeding. And children need consistency, Damien. They need to know that the person they call daddy today will still be there tomorrow, and next week, and next year. They need to know you won't get bored or find something more interesting or decide they're too much trouble. Her words carried the weight of experience, of nights spent alone with 3 crying babies, of birthdays celebrated without fathers, of the 1,000 small ways she'd had to be both mother and father to their children. "I won't leave again," he said firmly. "How can I believe that when you left before?" It was the question that haunted everything between them, the ghost that lived in every interaction, every tentative step forward. "How do you prove you've changed when your past betrayal was so complete?" "Because I finally understand what I lost," he said quietly. "And I understand what I found. This, being here with you and them, this is the only thing that's ever made me feel real." Their fragile progress was shattered on a Tuesday morning in October when Damien's phone rang with news that would threaten everything they'd built. "Mr. Ashcroft, this is Jean-Pierre from Le Figaro. We're running a story tomorrow about your secret family. Would you care to comment?" Damien's blood turned to ice. "What story?" "About your ex-wife and the triplets you abandoned." Quite a compelling human interest piece. Billionaire CEO's heartless betrayal, struggling single mother's triumph over adversity. Our readers will find it fascinating. The phone call was a courtesy, nothing more. The story was already written, already scheduled to run. By tomorrow morning, their private struggle would be front-page news across France, and by the afternoon, it would be international. He drove to Morgana's apartment faster than he should have, his mind racing through damage control scenarios. But when he arrived, she was already waiting for him, her face pale but determined. "They called you too," he said. "They wanted to interview me about overcoming abandonment and building a life from nothing." Her laugh was bitter. "Apparently, our story has all the elements of a compelling drama. I can stop this. I have connections, lawyers." "No." Her voice was firm. "No more pulling strings, no more trying to control the narrative. This is what happens when you're a public figure, Damien. Your life becomes entertainment for other people. But the children will be fine. Children are resilient. But they'll only be fine if we handle this together, honestly, without lies or media manipulation or whatever corporate crisis management strategy you're already formulating." She was right, and he knew it. But the thought of his children's faces splashed across tabloids, of their private moments dissected by strangers, made him feel sick with protective rage. "What do we do?" he asked. "We tell the truth, not to the media, but to the people who matter. Your family, my family, the children when they're old enough to understand. We control what we can control and let the rest go." That evening, Damien called his parents for the first time in months. The conversation went exactly as expected. "Triplets." His mother's voice was sharp with disapproval. "Damien, please tell me you're not seriously considering taking on someone else's children." "They're not someone else's children, Mother. They're mine. From a woman you divorced for good reason. A woman who was clearly trying to trap you with a pregnancy. She wasn't trying to trap me. She was trying to tell me about our children, and I was too selfish to listen." The silence on the other end of the line stretched until his father's voice cut through it. "Son, you need to think carefully about your reputation. Your company's reputation. This kind of scandal isn't a scandal," Damien interrupted. "It's my life, my family. And if you can't accept them, then maybe we don't have as much to talk about as I thought." He hung up before they could respond, feeling lighter and more frightened than he had in years. He'd just chosen his children over his family legacy, love over reputation, truth over image. For the first time in his adult life, he'd made the right choice from the very beginning. The media storm lasted exactly one news cycle before a celebrity scandal pushed their story off the front pages. But the damage was done, not to their reputations, but to their fragile sense of privacy and safety. Photographers had camped outside Morgana's apartment. Strangers recognized the children at the park. Well-meaning but intrusive neighbors suddenly had opinions about their situation. "We need to leave Paris," Morgana said one evening after a particularly difficult day when Aurelius had asked why the picture people were always following them. "Where would you go?" "I don't know. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere they can be children without being commodities." Damien had been thinking about this moment for weeks, preparing for it, but now that it was here, his carefully planned words deserted him. "Come with me," he said simply. "What?" "Come with me. Not to Paris or New York or any of the places where I'm known. Come to the house in Provence. It's private, secluded. There are gardens for them to play in, space for you to paint, room for all of us to figure out what this looks like. Morgana stared at him. You're asking us to move in with you? I'm asking for a chance to prove that I can be the man you and they deserve. I'm asking for the opportunity to be present for their childhood instead of just writing checks from a distance. And if it doesn't work, if we try this and it falls apart, then we'll figure out something else. But Morgana, I can't keep being a weekend visitor in my children's lives. I can't keep pretending that 2 hours on Tuesday afternoons is enough. Either I'm their father or I'm not. Either we're a family or we're not. The weight of what he was asking hung between them. Not just cohabitation, but the real, messy, daily work of building a family from the broken pieces of their past. The house is big enough that we don't have to. I mean, you'd have your own space, he added quickly. Your own studio, your own wing if you want it. I'm not asking you to be my wife again. I'm asking you to let me be their father. Will Morgana take the leap of faith that could give their children the father they deserve? Or will the ghosts of the past prove too powerful to overcome? The following part reveals the stunning conclusion to this emotional journey and the life lesson that will change how you think about true wealth forever. Hit that subscribe button now because you won't want to miss how this incredible story ends. Morgana was quiet for so long that Damien began to think she was formulating a gentle rejection. The silence stretched between them, filled with the distant sounds of parish traffic and the soft breathing of 3 sleeping children in the next room. You really think this could work? She asked finally. I think it's the only thing that could work, he replied honestly. I've tried living without you, without them. I've tried being successful in every way that the world measures success. None of it means anything, Morgana. None of it feels like living. She walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that had become backdrop to their complicated dance of approach and retreat. The house in Provence, tell me about it. It's nothing like the penthouse or the yacht or any of the other ridiculous things I bought when I thought stuff could fill the hole in my chest. He joined her at the window, careful to maintain the distance she seemed to need. It's a working vineyard, actually. The previous owner's family had run it for generations before financial trouble forced them to sell. I bought it thinking it might be a good investment, but when I saw it... When you saw it? What? I saw us, he admitted quietly. I saw the kitchen where you'd make breakfast while the kids played in the garden. I saw the studio we could build for you with those north-facing windows you always dreamed about. I saw Christmas mornings and birthday parties and all the ordinary moments that make a life extraordinary. Morgana turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. You bought a house because you imagined us living in it? I bought a house because for the first time in 3 years, I could imagine a future that didn't feel empty. He met her gaze steadily. But I never thought I'd have the chance to ask you to share it. What about your business? Your empire can be run remotely. The company is strong enough to function without me micromanaging every decision. In fact, it's probably better off without me trying to control everything. He smiled ruefully. Turns out I'm much better at being a father than I ever was at being a CEO. The children would need stability. Routine. They've already been through so much change. Then we'll give them roots. Real ones. Not the kind that money can buy, but the kind that grow from love and consistency and knowing that the people who matter most will never leave them. Morgana was quiet again, and Damien could almost see her weighing the possibilities against the risks, hope against fear, the dream of what they could be against the memory of what they'd been. 1 year, she said finally. What? 1 year trial. We try the house, try being a family, try to build something real together. But if it doesn't work, if the kids aren't happy, if we can't make it work, we walk away cleanly. No lawyers, no drama, no using them as pawns in whatever this is between us. Deal, Damien said immediately, then caught himself. But Morgana, I need you to know, this isn't a trial for me. This is me choosing them, choosing you, choosing the life we should have had all along. I'm not going anywhere again, whether this works or not. We'll see, she replied, but there was something softer in her voice, something that might have been hope. The Chateau de Belmont sat on 30 acres of rolling hills covered in grapevines, olive groves, and lavender fields. The house itself was 17th-century stone, weathered by time but solid as a fortress, with tall windows that let in golden Provençal light and rooms that seemed designed for the laughter of children. The triplets fell in love with it immediately. Big house. Maximilian shouted the moment they arrived, racing across the graveled courtyard with his arms spread like airplane wings. Aurelius was more cautious, as always, But even he couldn't hide his excitement as he explored the gardens, discovered the small pond with its family of ducks, found the perfect climbing tree with low, sturdy branches. Celeste stood in the doorway of what would become Morgana's studio, a sun-drenched room with windows facing north toward the mountains, and announced with absolute certainty, "Mama paint beautiful here." "Yes, sweetheart," Morgana said, her voice thick with emotion as she took in the space that was everything she'd ever dreamed of. "Mama can paint beautiful here." Damien watched them explore their new home with a feeling of completion he'd never experienced before. This was what wealth was actually for, not yachts or private jets or status symbols, but creating spaces where love could flourish, where children could grow up safe and happy, where the woman you loved could pursue her dreams without worry. "Thank you," Morgana said quietly that evening as they stood on the terrace watching the children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "For what?" "For understanding what we needed before I did. Tell us in the comments, what does home mean to you? Is it a place, or the people you share it with? And hit that like button if you believe that sometimes the best things in life come from the biggest risks. The early weeks were harder than either of them had expected. 3 toddlers in a new environment meant disrupted sleep schedules, tantrums over unfamiliar surroundings, and the constant challenge of establishing new routines. Damien discovered that being a full-time father was simultaneously the hardest and most rewarding job he'd ever undertaken. Corporate negotiations seemed simple compared to convincing Aurelius to eat his vegetables, mediating disputes between Celeste and Max over toy ownership, or maintaining patience during the third meltdown of the day. "Daddy stuck?" Celeste called one morning from the top of the climbing tree, having shinned up with the confidence of a monkey but lacking the skills to get back down. "Hold on, sweetheart," Damien called back, his heart racing as he climbed up to rescue her. "I've got you." As he helped her down, branch by careful branch, he realized this was what he'd been missing, not just the milestones and memories, but the everyday heroism of parenthood. The way they looked at him like he could solve any problem, fix any hurt, make any fear disappear. "Daddy brave," Celeste said seriously once they were safely on the ground. "Daddy's just learning," he replied, but her smile suggested she approved of his progress. Morgana watched these interactions with growing wonder. The man she'd married had been loving but distracted, always pulled toward the next opportunity, the next achievement. This version of Damien was present in a way that took her breath away, fully engaged with their children's needs, endlessly patient with their questions, committed to their happiness above his own comfort. "You're different," she told him one evening after they'd finally gotten all 3 children settled for the night. "Different how?" "Present. Before, even when you were physically there, part of you was always somewhere else. Planning, scheming, reaching for something just out of grasp." Damien considered this as he poured them each a glass of wine from grapes grown on their own land. "I used to think success meant always wanting more. Now I think it means recognizing when you already have everything." "And do you have everything you want?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities. They'd been living together for 2 months now, sharing space and responsibilities and the daily intimacy of raising children together, but carefully maintaining emotional distance. Separate bedrooms, separate lives that intersected only around their shared commitment to the triplets. "Almost everything," Damien replied carefully. "I have my children, their mother's trust, a home that feels like home. There's only one thing missing, which is the right to hold the woman I love. The right to call her my wife again. The right to grow old together raising our children and grandchildren, and maybe finding our way back to what we had before I was stupid enough to throw it away." Morgana set down her wine glass, her hands trembling slightly. "Damien, I'm not asking for an answer tonight," he said quickly. "I'm just telling you where I stand. I'm telling you that what we're building here, it's not just about the children for me. It's about us. It's about the future I want to spend with you." 3 weeks later, their fragile progress was tested when Maximilian developed a high fever that spiked to dangerous levels in the middle of the night. Morgana found him burning hot and unresponsive in his crib, and her scream brought Damien running. "Call the doctor," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic as she gathered Max into her arms. "Call an ambulance. Call everyone." The next 6 hours were a nightmare of emergency rooms and worried waiting, of doctors running tests and offering careful reassurances that didn't feel reassuring at all. Aurelius and Celeste, hastily left with the housekeeper, woke asking for their brother, sensing something was wrong even from a distance. Febrile seizure, the doctor finally explained. Common in children his age, but terrifying for parents. He'll be fine, but we want to monitor him overnight. Damien had faced hostile takeovers, crashed markets, and billion-dollar deals, but nothing had prepared him for the terror of holding his child's small, hot body while machines monitored his vital signs. Nothing had prepared him for the way his heart stopped every time Max shifted restlessly in his hospital bed. "I can't lose them," he whispered to Morgana as they kept vigil through the night. "I just found them. I can't lose them now." "You won't," she said firmly, but her hand found his in the darkness between their chairs, and for the first time in 3 years, she didn't pull away when he held on tight. When Max finally opened his eyes the next morning, fever broken and smile intact, his first word was "Daddy." "I'm here, buddy," Damien said, his voice rough with exhaustion and relief. "Daddy's here." "Daddy stay?" "Forever," Damien promised, meaning it with every cell in his body. "Daddy's staying forever." Morgana watched this exchange with tears streaming down her face, finally understanding that Damien's transformation wasn't performance or manipulation. It was genuine, complete, irreversible. He loved their children with the same fierce devotion she did, would sacrifice anything for their well-being, had finally learned what it meant to put family first. "I want to try again," she said quietly as they drove home with a recovered but sleepy Max strapped safely between his siblings. "Try what? Us. This. Being a real family instead of just 3 adults who happen to live in the same house." She looked at him, her green eyes bright with possibilities. "I want to try being married to you again. If you think you can handle being married to someone who'll never let you forget what matters most." Damien had to pull the car over because his hands were shaking too badly to drive safely. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious." "But Damien, if we do this, if we try again, we do it right this time. No prenups, no separate accounts, no keeping parts of ourselves in reserve. All in, everything shared, partners in every sense of the word." "Yes," he said immediately. "God, yes. Whatever you want, however you want to do it, yes. Even if it means the kids come first? Always. Even before business deals and social obligations and whatever empire you're building?" "Especially then," he replied, pulling her close for their first real kiss in over 3 years. "They already do come first. They already are my empire." They were married 6 months later in the garden at Belmont, surrounded by lavender in full bloom and the handful of people who'd supported them through their journey back to each other. No photographers, no society guests, no elaborate displays of wealth, just family, real friends, and 3 toddlers who served as ring bearers and stole every scene. Morgana wore a simple cream dress she'd found in a vintage shop in nearby AIXM province. Damien wore a navy suit from his old life but with wildflowers in his boutonniere that Celeste had picked for him that morning. "Do you, Damien, take Morgana to be your wife, knowing that she comes with 3 small people who will always need you more than any business deal ever could?" "I do," he said, his voice steady and sure. "And I promise to never forget again that the best investment I ever made was in this family." "Do you, Morgana, take Damien to be your husband, trusting him with your heart and your children's hearts, even though he broke them once before?" "I do," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "Because I believe in second chances, and I believe people can change, and I believe that love really can conquer anything if you're brave enough to fight for it." When they kissed, the children cheered and clapped, and Aurelius announced to the gathered crowd, "Daddy stays forever now." "Yes, sweetheart," Morgana laughed through her tears. "Daddy stays forever now." 1 year later, Damien stood in his vineyard at sunrise, watching Morgana paint the mountains while their children played at her feet. Aurelius was carefully building a fort out of paint tubes and brushes. Celeste was creating her own masterpiece on a small canvas Morgana had given her. Maximilian was spinning in circles with his arms outstretched, laughing at the pure joy of being alive. This was wealth. This was success. This was everything he'd spent 3 years trying to buy with money, finally achieved through love. His phone buzzed with a text from his former business partner. "Singapore deal fell through. Could have made us billions. Any regrets?" Damien looked at his family, his real family, the one he'd almost lost forever, and typed back, "None whatsoever." He'd learned the hardest lesson of all, that you can win every lottery in the world and still be bankrupt if you don't understand what truly matters. that love multiplied is the only currency that appreciates over time. That the most expensive mistake he'd ever made had also been the most valuable, because it had taught him the difference between having everything and having what matters. Here's what I want you to remember from Damien and Morgana's story. True wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or possessions. It's measured in the people who rush to hug you when you come home. It's measured in the trust of children who call you daddy, in the love of a woman who's willing to risk her heart again, in the ordinary moments that make life extraordinary. If this story has touched your heart, if it's reminded you what really matters in your own life, I want you to do 3 things. First, hit that subscribe button, because stories like this one, stories about love, redemption, and second chances, are what Lux Love Chronicles is all about. Second, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late to choose love over everything else. And third, tell us in the comments, what would you do if you had to choose between financial success and family happiness? What does true wealth mean to you? 5 years later, the Ashcroft-Thorne family Christmas card featured 5 faces now, the triplets, plus twin girls born 3 years after the wedding, all gathered around a Christmas tree grown on their own land. Damien's tech company had become one of France's most successful B corporations, prioritizing social impact alongside profit, run mostly by video conference from his home office while children played at his feet. Morgana's art had evolved too, her paintings now celebrating joy and hope rather than loss and abandonment. Her foundation provided art education to children across rural France, and her own children served as her most enthusiastic critics and biggest fans. "Daddy, tell the story," 6-year-old Aurelius requested one evening as Damien tucked him into bed. "Which story?" "The one about how you won the lottery and lost everything, then found everything when you found us." Damien smiled, settling into the familiar rhythm of their bedtime ritual. Once upon a time, there was a man who thought money could buy happiness. And as he told their story, he marveled again at the strange mathematics of love, where giving everything away had been the secret to having it all. Remember, beautiful souls, the lottery Damien really won wasn't the $8.2 million. It was the family he fought to deserve. Sometimes we have to lose everything to discover what we actually need. Sometimes the biggest risk we can take is loving someone enough to change who we are. And sometimes, if we're very lucky and very brave, second chances become first chances at the life we were always meant to live. Thank you for joining us for this journey. Until next time, this is Mr. Wentworth reminding you that love is the only luxury worth investing in. Don't forget to subscribe to Lux Love Chronicles for more stories that will change how you think about what really matters. Because every story we tell here has one message. Love is the ultimate luxury, and it's the one thing money can never buy, but the one thing worth sacrificing everything else to find.